morning. It's Shelley Moore. I've come back to read you another original short story from myself, Shelley Moore, LimitlessStimulus.com. Now, I've taken a little bit of a hiatus, you could say, over the last few weeks or so. I just had, writer's block. It wasn't really writer's block as much as it was I just didn't have the will to write, Life kind of ebb and flows as it does, and I was kind of in the ebb at the moment, and I just had a lot going on. And, this story in particular, I sat down like a couple weeks ago and pumped out the first page of it, and then I was done. I just did not feel like writing anymore. And I probably took another week break from it, and then I went back to it one day and put another paragraph in and then stopped, and then went back to it, after the weekend, and pumped out another couple of chapters. Well, I don't know, not chapters. This is a short story. I'm tripping on my words already, but so this one, it was a little labor intensive at first because I kind of fell into a funk. But as of yesterday and then again this morning, I really sat down and I finally had the drive and the energy, and I just pumped it out, and I went through and I edited it. I always stumble on that word. Maybe it's because of my subconscious hatred for editing. I hate editing. I need to strike it rich so that I can hire an editor to edit my stories. I just want to write. I don't want to edit. It's a damn good thing I've got a relatively good grasp on English grammar, American grammar, I should say. And actually, that being said, I love when I provide myself a segue without even meaning to. That being said, this story, I decided I wanted to throw the rule book in the fire and just throw out all the grammar, and I wanted to do it. I have deep Southern roots in this heart of mine, and my family is from Liberty, Kentucky, and I love it down there. I have some of the fondest memories of that area. Going to the creek and the creek. I don't say crick, they say crick. I love it so much. It's just one of those words that when I hear it, my heart swells like 5 times its size, because it just reminds me of Kentucky and my roots, I guess. My roots go back all the way to Scotland and Ireland. I'm very freckly redhead, but actually, I'm not a redhead. I'm a blonde, for those of you who haven't already checked out my picture on my website. But I do have freckles, and I'm very Scottish Irish. I have skin that is so pale that I just think about the sun, and oop, look, I have a sunburn. It's just how it is. I will never have that beautiful olive tan that my father and my friends get. My baby sister, she got the beautiful skin too, but me and my middle sister, we were blessed with that pale Irish Scottish skin. But after all of our family, I guess, migrated here to the beautiful mixing bowl of the United States, we migrated down into Kentucky, and that's where most of my extended family now live, that I haven't seen in a very long time, actually, since I was probably 15. But I got to thinking about my time down there for family reunions and such, and I'm talking like front porch sitting, guitar playing, my Aunt Ruth saying, "Shelly Ann, go get that bucket of lard off the porch," so she can make some biscuits and gravy. Like, those are my roots, and I'm proud of them, and I love them so much and so deeply. So I wanted to take all of that love and kind of create a story that's set down there in the South. And so hopefully I do it justice. I'm a little sniffly this morning. Thank you, spring, for showing up, because allergies are wonderful. But so just bear with me. It's a good time to remind you that this is my unprofessional audiobook series that I bring to you for free as a service to help your mind, I guess, escape during all this COVID chaos. So the name of this story is called The Darkness, and it's written by myself, Shelley Moore, for my website, LimitlessStimulus.com. I don't know what it was, damn it, but I know I can never go back, said Carl Jensen's. A deep-seated fear was visible not only in his eyes, but also in the way he hugged himself as he uttered the words. This day marked the spring equinox here in beautiful Liberty, Kentucky, and the weather, for once, seemed to approve of spring's arrival. Mounds of plowed snow ankle height still covered the edges of the driveway in which Carl and Ellen stood, but the sun shined intently, aiming to warm the ground and entice its sproutlings to burst through the cold soil to renew and revive Mother Earth from her winter slumber. "The wind's kicking today, ain't it, Carl?" Alan said in a sloppy effort to distract his friend from his tortured memories. "It's that warm front blowing in. Feels good, though, that warm, don't it? Hopefully all the snow will be gone by midweek." Alan tried again as he kicked the pile of dirt-covered snow. "Supposed to be 64 degrees tomorrow. Damn near tropical," Carl responded somberly. "Listen, bud, I don't mean to drag the lake here. I just thought you'd want to know about Jenny," Alan said. No, I appreciate it, Al, I do," Carl said as he turned his face to face his friend. "Jenny well, that's just a part of my life I didn't think I'd have to revisit for a long while, that's all." Alan put a hand on Carl's shoulder and said, "I know, pal, I know." "Eddie made her world-famous lavender lemonade this morning to ring in spring. Would you like a glass, Al?" "Well, with an introduction like that, how could I say no?" Alan laughed. "World-famous, you say? Well, in her own little world it's famous." Carl winked and laughed a raspy, guttural, clearly a chain smoker for most of his 86 years on this planet laugh. As they walked up the stairs of his front porch, Alan asked, "You know, Carl, I'd never pry, but you did promise to tell me the full story before you kicked the bucket, and no offense, my old friend, but time is not on our side." Carl laughed again, which sent him into a bit of a coughing fit. He removed a cotton handkerchief from the back pocket of his denim overalls to wipe the spittle from his lips, and then carefully seated himself in an old wooden rocking chair. "You know, if I'd have known getting old was this rough, I wouldn't have signed up for this shit," Carl said as he chuckled lightly, coughing again. "Oh, it's not all that bad, is it, Carl?" Alan asked. No, I suppose it's not all bad," Carl replied as he lifted his right side to return the hanky to his back pocket and then leaned to his opposite side to remove a small metal cigarette box from his left pocket. He held them out to Alan to offer him one, but Alan put his hand up to decline. Carl held the hand-rolled cigarette between his age-bitten lips with trembling hands, and Alan grabbed the lighter from the table between them and held it up for his friend. "You know, I hate it when you do that shit," Carl said as he took a long drag. "I know, but I'll never understand why," Alan replied. "Because it makes me feel useless. I'm not an invalid, damn it. I still have a few good years left in this carcass. I can light my own goddamn cigarette." "What was that? Sorry, I couldn't hear you over your ego," Alan joked. "I know you mean well, Al, I do. It's just how I am." "Just because I light your cigarettes for you don't mean you're any less valuable to this world, Carl," Alan assured him. "Besides, I always like the smell of these butane lighters, funny enough. Reminds me of my younger days. Reminds me of you and I working on your old Chevy in Jenny's old barn." Carl braced himself on the rocking chair's arms, then with a noticeable effort stood upright. He stretched his back a bit and then held a finger up toward Alan. "Stay put, young whippersnapper. I gotta fetch something," he said. Alan was only 9 years his junior, but Carl had referred to him as a whippersnapper since the day they met 50-some-odd years ago. "Hey, bring back some of that world-famous lemonade, would ya?" Alan shouted as the aluminum storm door slammed noisily behind Carl. A short moment later, Edwina, Carl's wife, came through the storm door carrying a glass pitcher filled with lavender-colored lemonade. Carl followed just behind her with 3 short glasses and a small notebook tucked under his arm. "Now, I don't know what Carl done told you about my lavender lemonade, Alan, but you best believe it's gonna be the finest damn lemonade you ever did taste, mark my words." Edwina smiled and winked at Alan as she set the pitcher on the table between the rocking chairs. "My grandmama passed this recipe down from her grandmama. We grow our own lavender and lemon, so you can't buy this in no stores now, you hear?" "Well now, Eddie, how is it I've known you for 50 years and you've never once offered me some of your heirloom lemonade?" Alan asked. "Well," Edwina said as she cast a quick side glance at her husband as she wiped her hands on her apron. Let's just say it's reserved for special occasions only. More importantly, Eddie, how is it I've known you for 50 years and you haven't aged a damn day? Alan asked with a flirty grin. Edwina flushed with crimson and smiled. Oh, now you stop that, you old charmer. Now, I'm not walking off this porch until you taste my lemonade and tell me how astoundingly delicious it is. Well, then what's the hold-up, Carl? You planning on taking those glasses to your grave or what, old-timer? Pour her some damn lemonade, Alan joked. Carl's hands shook vigorously as he lifted the heavy pitcher, so Edwina took it from him lovingly and poured 3 glasses. She handed one to each of the men before taking her own, and then leaned against the wooden handrail to face the men as she sipped, eyes fixed on Alan as she awaited his approval. Wow, Eddie, you ain't kidding. This is the finest damn lemonade I dare say I have ever had. What's the secret? Alan asked. Cocaine, she replied. Alan damn near spit his beverage all over the front of her apron, but caught the spray in his hands before it reached her. Carl and Edwina roared with laughter. Oh, I'm just yanking your chain, Al. There ain't no secret to it, really. It's just plain old lemons and sugar and lavender. I let it steep out in the sunlight. Maybe that's my family secret. Sunlight, hell. I don't know, but it's good, ain't it? She said, still trying to contain her laughter. It's damn good, Eddie, Alan replied as he took another sip. All right, then. I'm going to let you 2 old farts catch up. Holler if you need anything, she said as she opened the storm door. I've been itching to bake a pie, what with spring finally coming back around. Al, how long you planning on hanging round? I got preserves in the cellar I could whip us up a tasty peach or cherry pie with. He'll be here for quite a while, Ed. We've got a lot to yap about. Make your pie. We'll gobble that sucker right up, Carl said to his wife. Fantastic. I love a good excuse to make a pie. It's so good to see you, Alan. Always such a pleasure. She winked as the noisy metal door slammed behind her. Carl sat his glass on the table and picked up the notebook he had brought out with the glasses. Eddie, Carl shouted at his wife over his shoulder, would you bring me out my readers, darling? Where'd you leave 'em this time? Edwina shouted back. Hell if I know, Carl mumbled quietly, but then shouted back, maybe on the dining room table? What's that? Alan asked, nodding toward the notebook in Carl's hands. It's a notebook. Boy, you must be dumber than I thought, Carl joked. I know it's a notebook, but why'd you bring it out for? Alan asked. Well, I'll get to that as soon as I get my damn readers, Carl said as he flipped through the old yellowed pages. Edwina came back outside, black-rimmed reading glasses in hand, this time with her long strawberry gray hair tied up in a bun, presumably for baking purposes. We should get you 10 more pairs of these bastards. That way you can keep a pair in every room, she said as she handed them over. I'd still find a way to lose 'em, Carl replied. Yeah, you sure would, she said as she made her way back into the house. You'd lose that head of yours if it wasn't attached. She ain't wrong, Carl said, glancing over the top of his readers at his friend. Once a Spitfire, always a Spitfire, Alan said. I remember when you two met at Pap's. You and me was drinking beer and shooting pool, and in walks this group of girls, all brunettes except for Eddie. She had that fire-red hair, and you fell in love the moment you laid eyes on her. I don't know about that now. I think she chased me a little, Carl said. Alan laughed and said, the only chasing that was done back then was you chasing her. Well, that's not how I remember it, Carl said defensively, but you're probably right. My memory ain't all that fine-tuned these days, which is why I have this book, actually. Alan took another sip of his lavender lemonade, then set it gently in his lap. I started writing it down all years ago, you see, 'cause I knew memory can be a fickle thing. I threw my back out starting up that damned old green lawnmower one day, and I realized then my body was starting to go and my mind would surely follow. So, while I was laid out with that bad back, I started writing it all down. Carl explained. I have 13 others just like it inside my bedroom bookshelf, just full of memories. So what's in this one? Alan asked. Is it from then? Yes, sir, it is, and I'm fixing to let you read it, Carl said as he studied the book carefully. But first, I'm going to tell you a bit of the story from my own mouth. I've been waiting for this for a long time, old friend, Alan said. Yes'm, I know. The time has come, Carl replied as he opened the notebook to its first pages and began reading. Let's see here. September 21st, 1912 was a day I'll never forget. Mama baked butter cookies with strawberry jam and Willie broke his ankle. Carl shut the book and set it gently in his lap. My brother Willie and I were chasing squirrels that day. Willie, being 6 years younger, was trying to prove he could hunt one down without shooting it. Trying to prove himself to me, I suppose. I told him he can't do it. I told him they was too fast for him, but Willie could never be told he couldn't do something. Only made him want to do it more. You know how boys is. Had a lot to prove to the world, or I think he thought he did anyway. He was a runt, you see, born real small-like and half-deaf. So anyways, we chased this one squirrel right up a tree, and he went about climbing that tree and tried to get at it. He climbed maybe 10 feet up, then scooted it out onto a branch. Branch broke, of course, and Willie came crashing down. Bone was sticking out the skin on his ankle, but he didn't cry. In fact, he tried walking back to the house on his own. Paul heard the branch snap, came a-running from the house, picked him up, carried him inside. That's the only time Willie cried, begging Paul to put him down and let him walk on his own. Tough kid, Alan said. Well, he thought so anyway. It wasn't so much tough as it was stubborn as a goddamn mule, Carl replied. That's what got him into trouble. Carl took a moment to take a sip from his lemonade, then reached for another cigarette from his back pocket. Alan held the butane lighter up for his friend once again, and once again Carl shot him a disapproving look, but accepted nonetheless. I don't mean to jump the gun here, but Willie passed away when he was young, didn't he? Alan asked. Well, now, damn it, don't ruin the ending, Carl said as silver smoke escaped his nostrils and lips. All right, I'll keep my trap shut. I want to hear this story. I'm just anxious. That's all, Alan said. Stories always have a beginning and an end, but the important part is what comes in between, Carl says. Everyone's always so anxious to start and so anxious to finish, they forget the details are what give life its meaning. It's like eating the crust of a loaf of bread and throwing away the soft, delicious innards. Such a damn waste. Willie used to do the opposite, matter of fact. Eat the innard and throw away the crust. Mama get so mad she'd whip him with a spoon. Carl laughed to himself over the memory and took a long drag from his cigarette. Mama wasn't violent, really. Her spoon whippings didn't hurt, but we pretended they did, only to make her feel like she'd disciplined us properly. Mama couldn't hurt a fly if she tried. She loved all her children, me, Willie, Chester, Lee, Betty, Sue Ellen, and Bee. She told us all the time we was her whole world and that the sun, moon, and stars of her universe revolved around each of us. Well, that's beautiful, Alan chimed in. She was. She was beautiful inside and out. They just don't make 'em like Ella Jane Whitley anymore. She was the last of her kind, sweet beyond measure. Would give a stranger the shirt off her back, if you will. Paul was a kind man, too, but nowhere near the caliber of what Mama was. Mama was an angel sent down to help a broken world, but the world broke her before she could fix it. Carl stared somberly at the notebook in his lap for a moment and then took another long drag of his cigarette. I'm real sorry I never had the chance to meet her, Carl, Alan said. You would have liked her, Al. She was a lot like my Edwina, but just without that fire. Don't get me wrong, fire's why I fell in love with my wife, but my mama was all heart. Just love, pure love. We'd have not a penny to our name, but she'd spend her days baking bread for the neighbors who were struggling too. Once, Willie, Bee, Betty, and myself was taking a walk with Mama, and Bee found a penny on the road. Me and Bee wanted to buy a chocolate bar with it, but as we was walking, a mother with her 4 young kids was walking down the opposite side of the road, and Mama took that penny out of Bee's hands, kissed her on her forehead, then walked it over to that mother. We couldn't hear what was said between the two of them, but Lady gave Mama a big old hug, and Mama walked back over to us with the biggest smile on her face. Her face just lit up like the sun when she did good things for others. She was always happiest when she could help other people. The long ash on Carl's cigarette fell onto his lap, So he brushed it off casually and flicked the remainder of the cigarette over the porch railing and into the grass. He was fishing a replacement from his back pocket before the butt even hit the soil. Anyways, Mama was just a pure soul, pure as they come. I think that's likely why Willie's death affected her the way it did. She just wasn't built for such atrocity. Not that any of us are, really, you know what I mean. I reckon Mama's very soul was broken beyond repair that day those police officers showed up at our house. She never was the same after that. 15 months after they found Willie's body in that creek, Mama shot herself in the heart with Paul's shotgun. I always found her chosen method of leaving this world symbolic, shooting the very thing that had broken beyond repair. You mind if I ask how Willie passed? Alan asked cautiously. Well, I haven't talked about it in a long while, Al, but I will now. Willie deserves to be talked about. He was small in stature, but gigantic in spirit. It's a damn shame he hasn't been spoken about in all these years, really. Carl took a drag from his cigarette, and then a long sip of his lemonade. Need to wet the old whistle, he said whimsically as he sat back in his chair and began to slowly rock as he stared off into the distance. Willie had just celebrated his 8th birthday the previous week. Ma had baked a big old cake with fresh cream and strawberries, and we was still eating on it days later. Mama asked Willie and me to take a big piece down the road to the Jameses' place. Their mama had just had a baby the day before, so Mama wanted them to have cake to celebrate. They was poor as us, so a piece of cake was hard to come by, you see. May as well have been a brick of gold. So, anyways, me and Willie set off down the road to the Jameses' place, which was a good 1.5 miles or so down from our place. When we got there, no one was outside working, so we knocked on the door, and Bo Ramsey, the father, he answered. He was all too happy to accept that cake, but he stood there and ate that cake right in front of us in that doorway, which we both found odd. Why wouldn't he go share with his wife or his kids? He made small talk with us, asking about our ma and pa, asking about how our crops was doing this year. We didn't have much to say, really, so once he finished that cake, we turned around and headed back home. When we got home, Pa was in the living room yelling at Mama, which neither of us had ever seen him do before. And when he noticed Willie and me standing in the doorway, he ran over to us, dropped to his knees, and hugged us tight. We just kind of looked at each other like, what in the world is this all about, Pa said, I don't ever want you going back to the Jameses' place again, you hear? It was more of a command than a question. He had real fear in his eyes that day, and I didn't understand why, but I'd learn soon enough. Carl stopped to wet his whistle again, coughed a bit, wiped his mouth with his handkerchief, then continued with his story. Next day I woke up to my sister B shaking me. She crying, Where's Willie? Have you seen Willie? But I hadn't seen him since we went to bed the night before. We shared a room, Willie and I. His bed was just feet from mine. There's a window between our beds. I jumped up, and, of course, we spent the whole morning searching the property for him, hollering his name as loud as we could. Neighbors eventually joined in when they heard us hollering. Pretty soon we was searching the whole damn street, all 9 farms. Arthur Stansbeggy had his bloodhounds out searching and everything. It was a big ordeal. The police got called in at some point, of course, and the search continued for 19 days until one day, a Tuesday, as I recall, Arthur Stansbeggy's hounds found my brother's lifeless body in a creek 2 miles down the way. I'm so sorry, Carl. Truly, what an awful tragedy, Alan said. The tragedy happened before those hounds found his body. The tragedy is what God stood by and watched happen to my baby brother. With resentment in his eyes and anger visible in his posture, he flicked the cigarette butt over the railing and fished another from his back pocket, and again, Alan was ready with the lighter. You don't have to tell me if it's too painful, Carl. I do understand, Alan said. No, it's good to talk about it. It's good to get it out. People need to know what kind of evil there is in this world, Carl said as he sat back in his rocker once again and began rocking slowly. My brother had been sodomized, beaten within an inch of his life, and then left for dead in that creek bed. He'd been so badly beaten that his face was unrecognizable. My pa had to identify him by the scar on his ankle from where he'd fallen out that tree. Oh my, Carl, I don't even know what to say. Did they catch that evil bastard who'd do such a thing? Carl shook his head as he took a long drag from his cigarette, and he said, They didn't, but we all know who did it. It was Bo Jamesy. 4 other boys about Willie's age went missing over the next few years. We all knew it was Bo, but, see, Bo's brother was a police officer here in town, so nothing ever came of it. The screen in our bedroom window had been cut with a knife, and that's how he got in and took little Willie. The other 4 boys was taken the same way. Bo always had a pocket knife he was fidgeting with when you'd see him, always whittling away a piece of wood or cleaning his nails, always. Ma and Pa said they'd heard things, too. Things the Jamesy children had told others about their pa touching them inappropriately and making them do things they shouldn't do, especially being so little. Special place in the bowels of hell for that kind of evil. Your poor mama. I can only imagine what she went through knowing her boy had been brutalized in such a fashion. Alan sympathized. 2 days. That's how long they think Willie laid there in that crick dying before succumbing to his injuries. 2 whole days. Which means he had to have heard us calling for him, Al. He just couldn't call back. His jaw was damn near torn off. His tongue had been cut out and cauterized. Cauterized, Alan. Kid I went to school with once said he bets that the guy does it to his victims so they can't scream. Said he probably keeps them for days locked up somewhere so he can torture them, but don't want to call them out, so he cuts their tongues out, but cauterizes it so they won't bleed out. Jesus, Alan could only say. I hope he came down and took those boys' souls from their bodies before it all began so they didn't suffer. I sure do. I pray for just that thing every single day of every goddamn month of every year since it happened. So Bo Jamesy never paid for his crimes? Alan asked. Never. Lived to be an old man in that very same house. Died peacefully in his sleep, Carl said spitefully. He then spat on the ground beside him in a display of disgust. Months after he passed, Elizabeth Jamesy, Bo's widow, showed up at our doorstep one day unannounced with a freshly baked cake. Paul opened the door and asked her to come in, but she declined. She started crying, them big, heavy, sorrowful tears they twist a pretty face into knots. She said, I'm so sorry about your boy. My husband was not a kind man. The world is a brighter place with him gone. And then she turned away and walked back home. Now I understand why you're so sure it was Bo Jamesy, Alan said. It was Bo Jamesy. Looking back after they found Willie, I remembered the way he looked us up and down that day we gave him his cake and how he asked us to come inside. I wonder why I didn't wake up when he came inside our bedroom that night. Willie was a fighter. There's no way in hell he'd have left without kicking and screaming. Jenny dated one of them Jamesy boys, you know, Carl said. I didn't know that. Which one? Alan asked. Frank. Frank courted Jenny for a few years, actually. They's engaged to be married, but Jenny called it off, Carl explained. Well, I'll be damned, Carl replied. So, Carl said as he laid both hands upon the notebook in his lap, now that you know about Willie, I suppose it's time to tell you about, well, you know. Alan adjusted himself in his seat and then reached for the pitcher of lemonade to refill his glass. After he refilled his own, he refilled his friend's and then relaxed in his chair with his lemonade held firmly between both hands, resting in his lap. I suppose I'll just jump right in. It's like going swimming. Quickest way to get used to the cold water is just jump on in. Carl chuckled to himself and he flicked his cigarette butt over the railing. Jenny used to run with the Boyd gang, 5 brothers who lived down next to her. They protected her like they would a sister. No funny business or any of that. She was a bit of a tomboy, likely because of her time was mostly spent with them boys, and they'd always be found down at that creek, swinging from ropes and jumping into the water and such, which we weren't really permitted to do, but what are rules good for if you can't break 'em? Carl winked playfully. We all used to hang down there at this one spot in a creek we called Bone Dry Ridge because the edge was much higher than the rest of the creek, so you could sit up there in the sun and dry off after swimming. On this particular day, there was a group of about 15 of us kids just enjoying the day, smoking cigarettes, drinking, necking, and just doing all them things teenagers do. Just enjoying life and all its blissful sins. I do enjoy me a good sin every now and again, Alan joked as they both raised their glasses and lightly tapped them together. Don't we all, brother, don't we all? Sin without reason, anyway. Some people ain't born with that part of the brain that tells them which sins are morally breakable and which ain't. That's the problem with evil. It's all good and fun until one day it just isn't. Anyhow, someone, I don't know who it was, but someone dared Jenny jump from Bone Dry Ridge into the creek below. At first, Jenny said no, explaining it was too dangerous because that stretch of the creek was just too damn shallow, but you know how kids are. They kept poking and prodding and nudging and tempting, and wasn't long before Jenny was standing at that ledge looking down, trying to gauge the safest way to jump. A few of us tried to get her to sit back down, but she wasn't having any of it. She was every bit as rough and tumble as them boys was, and she wanted to prove to 'em. Someone, again I don't know who it was, started shouting a countdown for her to jump in, starting at 10. Then, of course, just about everyone joined in, and they was all yelling 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. And before they even got to 3, Jenny jumped. I scrambled on my hands and my knees to that ledge as fast as I could move, and when I looked over that edge, I saw Jenny floating face down in that water below. I ran down that embankment there and right into that water, screaming her name. She didn't answer. Finally made my way over to her, and just as I reached for her, she jumped out that water and scared me so damn bad I almost needed a new pair of breeches, I did. Say, in her mind, it was just a fun little prank, but in mine, I saw my brother's lifeless, beaten body floating on that water. Something snapped in me. A darkness fell upon my mind and in my eyes, and next thing I remember, I was waking up middle of the night 3 weeks later. 3 full weeks. Of course, I hadn't discovered the time loss until later that day as I went about my business as usual, and it took quite a bit of convincing for me to believe that it wasn't just another prank being played on me by my friends, but sure as shit, 3 weeks of my life was just gone. Poof, vanished like someone snipped them out of my brain like coupons from the Sunday paper. You never told me that part, Carl, said Alan. Damn right I never told you that part, and I never told anyone else either. I didn't want everyone to think I was losing my marbles, Al. I never heard of someone just losing time like that, never in my life. So I played dumb for the next few weeks and slowly pieced together at least bits and pieces of the things I'd done during that time. I went about my chores on the farm as normal, but my sister Bee told me that I had been awfully quiet. You quiet? Alan joked. Well, that's just it. Quiet ain't my usual way, now is it? Bee and me was real close at that time, and she said I'd barely said 5 words to her in weeks. She thought I was angry with her for some reason, but turns out I treated everyone else the same way. I was just quiet, just kept to myself. They assumed I was angry over the prank Jenny pulled on me, and I just let them continue to think that because I didn't know how else to explain the fact that I could not remember 3 whole weeks of my life. I pretended to get over it and make up with my friends, and we all just continued life as normal, but the thing is, I'd have these dreams. Y'all okay on that lemonade? Want me to bring you a fresh pitcher? Edwina shouted from just behind the storm door, startling both Carl and Alan. Yeah, actually, Eddie, if you'd be so kind, it appears there very well might be a hole in the bottom of this here glass pitcher. Alan replied playfully. Oh, I just hate it when that happens, Edwina joked back as she stepped outside to grab the empty pitcher. Her apron had flour on it now, and her hair had begun to fall out of its bun in pieces that framed her face. Give me just a second to whip up another. I'll give you 10 just for being so damn pretty, Carl flirted with his wife, grabbed her rear end as she passed. Oh, Carl! She hit him playfully in the chest. Not in front of our guests. What's wrong with you? Must be the cocaine lemonade, Carl laughed, sending him into another coughing fit. Alan, you need to tell your friend Carl here that he needs to have that cough looked at by Dr. McCuney because he sure ain't listening to me about it, she said. Go to a doctor, Carl, Alan said. Yeah, I'll get all right on that, Carl replied sarcastically as he dabbed the corners of his mouth with his handkerchief. Edwina went back inside to make another batch of her world-famous lavender lemonade, the aluminum door slamming behind her. A gaggle of geese flew in a semi-perfect V formation overhead, their black heads and wings a stark contrast to the powder blue sky. They honked noisily as they passed, encouraging one another to keep up their speed. Edwina returned to the porch just as they passed out of sight and poured them each a fresh glass of lemonade. Y'all need anything else, don't be shy now, she said as she retreated inside the home. Where was I? Carl asked. You was having dreams, Alan reminded him. Oh, yes, them dreams. Not every night, but most nights I'd have these dreams that felt more real than not. I'd have dreams of standing right in the middle of that creek, water up to my chest, an overwhelming feeling of something dark just watching me from the banks. If I tried to move my legs, the current would sweep me off my feet and I'd drown. You'd actually drown in your dream? Alan asked. Yeah, buddy, and let me tell you, it was as real as your whippersnapper ass sitting here next to me, asking questions and interrupting my story, Carl joked. I felt that water as it filled my lungs. It burnt like fire. I felt and I heard water rushing around my ears, and then everything would just go quiet, peaceful-like, serene. And then I'd wake up gasping for air. Jesus, Carl. Well, you can just call me Carl, Al, but I accept the compliment, Carl joked, laughing at himself once again. He took a sip of water to calm the cough that followed before it got the best of him. The dreams went on for a bit until I learned to try not to walk away when I was standing in the water. One night when I was dreaming, I realized I was dreaming, and I told myself to stand firm, and I did just that. The water rose up around me up to my neck, but I stood firm against the current. And then I noticed a black shadow about the size of that there oak tree, he said as he pointed to an enormous old oak beside his driveway, watching me from Bone Dry Ridge. It was creepy as hell, and it moved kind of snake-like in a way, and made its way down to me in the water. It scared me so bad the first couple times that I just woke right up. Didn't take long to fix my nerves, though, reminding myself it was just a dream and all. So one night I'm in this dream down in that creek, same spot, black shadows circle around me in the water. It's not in the water, you see. It's above the water, circling my head round and round, and then I hear it speak, Alan. It said in a real low growl almost, I am the father of this land, and you are a trespasser. Well, the sound of the voice itself was enough to scare last night's dinner right out me, and I woke up vomiting all over my bedroom floor, I did. The night after that, I dreamt the most awful dream. I dreamt I was Bo Jamesy, standing over the chained body of my baby brother, broken and beaten, and I was pissing on him. Sweet Christ, Alan replied. Carl quickly wiped a tear from his eye, then adjusted himself in his chair before continuing. The next night, I dreamt of another little boy chained and beaten as I stood above him as Bo Jamesy, burning him with the lit end of a cigarette over and over, laughing and mocking him as he tried to cry out for his mama, but he couldn't because he had no tongue. Mother of God, Alan could only whisper. You can use your imagination as to what my dreams was for the next few nights. Needless to say, I dreaded the sun setting during that time. Well, I'd imagine so, said Alan. One night, those dreams stopped, though, and the dream with the crick and the black shadow returned. This time he said to me in that hellish voice of his, I am chaos. I am pain. Your body gives me life again. He repeated this over and over until my ears and my nose began to bleed in the dream, And then when I awoke, real blood was dripping from my nose and my damn ears onto my pillow. Alan was silent. There were no words strong enough to puncture his astonishment. Later that next day, word came that 4 of Bill Buxton's cattle had been found with their throats slit. I knew deep down within my very soul that I had done it. I had no memory of doing it, nor was it anything I'd have willingly done, but I knew I'd done it. I just knew, damn it. It was in that moment I realized this thing was using my body. That's what was causing those missing chunks of time, him taking over. Scared the ever-loving shit out of me, Al. Carl paused his story for a moment, picked up his glass of lemonade, and stared into it silently. He then adjusted himself in his chair, exhaled audibly, shook his head as if to shake away the thoughts that plagued him, and then finished off the contents of the glass before setting the glass back onto the table beside him. He shifted his weight so as to remove the metal cigarette box from his back pocket, removed the last cigarette from within it, and grasped it between his pursed lips as he put the box back into his pocket. Alan reached for the lighter, but Carl held his hand up to him. "No, I'm not going to smoke this, and not yet. Not till I finish telling you everything I need to tell you," Carl said, with the cigarette still held tightly between the side of his mouth that wasn't being used to speak. "I'm sure your lungs will appreciate the break," Alan said. Carl raised his eyebrows and nodded his head in agreement as he laughed lightly enough to not cause a subsequent coughing fit. "You sound like my old lady," Carl said, removing the cigarette from his lips and holding it between his fingers. "Now, where was I?" "You woke up from a dream all bloodied up," Alan reminded him. "Oh, yes. That was quite a shock, as you can imagine. So my first stop that next day was the church. Now, my family weren't exactly the church-going type, but we was raised to believe in God, and I thought maybe that's where I needed to be. Maybe a priest could help me out. So I showed up at Ian McGregor's door as he finished his burnt toast and coffee, and I spilled the beans. I told him all I knew, anyway. He never once looked at me like I was batshit crazy, though, which I fully expected. He put his hand on my forehead, and he drew the sign of the cross, then said some words about something or other, and said he done performed a blessing on me, and that we'd be right from that point forward, and I believed him. I walked home that morning with a bounce in my step, and the world seemed a brighter place. It sure did." It absolutely was not. Carl brought the unlit cigarette again to his lips and held it there as he said, "That night, little Susie Ann Jankin was taken from her bed as she slept and killed at the creek. 2 boys, no older than Willie was when he passed, found her body that next morning as they was searching for crawdads. Not a scratch on her. They said she looked like a little porcelain doll floating face up in that water." One tear fell from Carl's eye to his lap beneath, followed by another, and then 2 more. He sniffled, and then took the unlit cigarette from his lips and held it between his fingers once again. He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt, cleared his throat, and then continued. "I knew I'd done it the moment I heard. I just knew, like with the cattle. I mean, I didn't do it. I would never have done something that evil to that poor little girl, but the darkness inside me had used my body to commit that crime." Carl opened the notebook and flipped a few pages before finding what it was he was looking for. He read it aloud. "I know it used me. I know it sure as I know the sky is blue and that bee hates pickled eggs. It's as if the darkness inside of me was making a mockery of the priest's blessing. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. A voice in my head tells me to turn myself in, but for what? The person I was born as, the boy who loves playing in the woods and riding my horse, could not and did not commit such a terrible crime. I'd be punished for something I would never do. But I'd be locked up, so I wouldn't be able to commit another evil act. Will it commit another act? As I write this, I sense an answer coming from within myself that says yes, in the deep growling voice of the darkness. I'm scared, terrified. I don't know how to stop it. Carl shut the notebook and raised his gaze to the setting sun on the horizon. My God, Al. I was such a kid then. I was so scared. I was scared to my core. I ain't never been scared like that before. I've been scared, sure, but not like this. Carl motioned with his head for Al to light his cigarette. You aren't finished yet, are you? Alan asked. No, but I can't make it through this next part without a smoke, so light me up, whippersnapper, Carl said. Carl took a long drag of his cigarette, and Alan watched as the delicate paper burned away at its edges as he inhaled deeply. I didn't know what to do, so I went to the priest again. I ran there as fast as I could. I pounded on that door as if I was the police with a search warrant. Carl laughed as he recalled the memory. Probably scared the shit out of old Ian McGregor. He came to that door and let me right in. I didn't wait for no damn confessional booth or any of that silly shit. I just confessed it all. I told him I just knew the darkness was using my body as a vessel, and I needed to know how to get it out of me. He made a phone call to a friend of his, and he said she might be able to help. Pearlie Mae Watkins showed up a half hour later with a big old book under her arm. Pearlie Mae was the unofficial town historian of sorts. Little lady, 80 pounds, soaking wet. She starts telling me the Native Americans had put a curse on this land hundreds of years ago when the white man invaded their village, murdered their men and their children, and raped their women and took them in as slaves. Hell, I'd have put a curse on them too. We call them savages, but that seems a little bass-ackwards to me, doesn't it? She said they cursed the land and all who would live on it for centuries to come. We think the darkness was the curse. It'd take over the body of a man or a woman for all we knew and do terrible, unthinkable things in retribution for the crimes we committed against their people. Pearlie Mae said it was an unspoken but widely held belief amongst those who knew of the curse that Bo Jamesy had been possessed by this curse for most of his life, causing him to be such a horrid man. She said she'd gone to school with him, and he was a pleasant boy, but as a teen he'd turned. We talked and talked that day and figured maybe the curse takes those it wants to inhabit once they're down at that creek, because water was considered very sacred to the natives and could be used to transfer energy. I didn't really understand all that at the time. All I knew was it was starting to make sense, which meant we might be able to get it out of me before it caused any more harm. Pearlie Mae said we had to find an elder from that tribe. Now, I didn't know how in the Sam hell we was going to go about finding an elder from a 300-year-old native tribe, but Pearlie Mae said she had a contact. She said she'd call him and see about meeting up sometime that week, but I'll be damned if that priest didn't stand and raise his voice at her. He slammed his hands on that table and said, "We need him now, Pearlie Mae, don't you see? He'll murder again and again between now and then. We need him right this very second." Pearlie Mae was startled by the priest's emotional plea, but she listened. She made that call right that very second. 2 hours later, a man by the name of Little Bear, who was not little at all, mind you, showed up at the priest's door. Little Bear, whose English name was Thomas, came in full ceremonial headgear, and I swear to you, he never once took his eyes off me. He felt that darkness within me from the moment he got there. He burned sage and lemongrass and filled that whole house with thick smoke as he chanted and sang in the language none of us could understand. After an hour of this, he said we needed to go down to that creek, so we walked on down there together. And just as we reached those banks, everything went black. Everything. I don't remember a damn thing for the next 6.5 hours until I woke up, middle of the night, soaking wet, half submerged in the damn creek. Pearlie Mae and the priest was wet too, and the look of fear on their faces as they looked back at me. My God, Al, I can't even begin to describe. Carl took a drag of his cigarette. Alan realized he hadn't breathed in well over a minute, so he inhaled deeply to restore the natural rhythm of his breathing. Somberly, Carl said, "The priest had a bloody nose and his collar was hanging half off. Pearlie Mae had lost a shoe somehow and covered in mud clear up to her knees, which were all bloodied and raw. Her hair was a mess and Bits of mud were caked in it. She was sobbing. Real heavy, terrified sobs, Al. All while staring me down like I done tried to rape her or some shit. Talk about a total mindfuck, because for all I knew, I had tried to rape her or kill her. I couldn't remember shit. Thomas, the Native American elder man, he stood on Bone Dry Ridge looking down at me. He told the priest and Pearly May that the curse had been removed from my body, but that it couldn't be removed from the land. He said the energy of the atrocious acts that had been committed here in the past were too thickly woven into the land, and that the curse would remain forever. He warned that no one should come to this water. He said the water was a conduit for allowing the dark energy to merge into a human body. "You all right over there, Al?" Carl asked, noticing his friend had once again forgotten to breathe. Alan snapped out of it and replied, Yeah, I'm fine. It's just, it's just all a bit hard to wrap my head around, Carl." Carl laughed and said, "Don't I know it? I hardly believe it myself. It feels like it's some damn made-up memory from a different lifetime, even as I recall it, truth be told, but it's the God's honest truth." Well, I don't doubt that, but... "So is that why there's signs down at the creek now saying no one can swim because of deadly bacteria?" Alan asked. "Yes, sir. That's why. Pearly May came up with that, clever little lady. No one questions it either, thank the heavens. Although I'm sure one day some stupid kid will think he knows better and he'll walk right past those signs and get in that water. We'll know when it happens, too. We'll know because we'll start hearing of murders. Little Bear, Thomas, said the curse will find a way to manifest. I didn't even know what that word meant back then, but I come to figure it out as I got older, and I believe he's right. He vowed to go down to Bone Dry Ridge once a year until the day he leaves this earth to provide a peace offering and chant a blessing in his own native tongue, and as far as I know, he held up on that deal. Just last year he passed away. Colon cancer got him. Now I'm real worried about what's to come. What if we made it angry? It's just down there been stewing on its own anger for all these years, planning and plotting its revenge. I don't know if that's how these things work, Al, but I know what it's capable of, and I'm scared. I'm a wrinkly old bastard, and I'm terrified. I might not be on this earth for another decade, but my grandchildren will. I got 16 of them. Ruby June's the oldest. She done got her driver's license just last month, and Jack, he's the youngest. He just learned to walk over the summer. Carl smiled lovingly as he thought about his grandchildren, but his smile quickly faded, and his lips began to tremble with fear. I have to warn them, but every time I try, they call me Old Crazy Pa. I can't tell them everything, because then they'll think I'm a murderer, or they think I've just plain lost my marbles. Have you told your own children anything? Alan asked. No, never, Carl replied sharply. Why not? Same reasons, Carl answered. What about Edwina? Alan asked. I've told her bits and pieces, but never the full story, Carl said. Alan sat back in his chair and sighed loudly. Well, hell, old-timer, this is quite the conundrum, Alan said. You ain't wrong, Carl said. Alan poured Carl a fresh glass of lavender lemonade and then proceeded to top his own off. He picked Carl's glass up from the table and handed it to his friend, then picked up his own and held it up in the air between them. They clinked their glasses together, then sat back in their rockers. Both men rocked gently in silence for the next several minutes as they watched the setting sun on the horizon. Y'all ready for some pie? Edwina said as she pushed the aluminum door open with her behind and made her way over to the men with a freshly baked blackberry pie. I just realized I had way more blackberry preserves than I knew what to do with, so blackberry pie it is. Just gonna set it here on this porch for a bit to cool. Figured you boys could watch it and make sure no one comes by and steals it. Ain't no one gonna steal your pie, Eddie, Carl said. You don't know that, Edwina replied. There's bad people all over. I just heard on the radio 2 little girls went missing from their bedrooms just across town. Some folk think they ran away, but others suspect they've been kidnapped. There's a prayer vigil down at the church later today I'm fixing to go to. Y'all are welcome to join me." The men stared at each other with terror-filled eyes, and Alan dropped his glass to the porch's wooden floor. The end.